So these are all my unwrapped books for the month of January. Hello everybody, it's Casera, and today I'm going to be doing my January Unwrap-Up, where I talk about my unwrapped book challenge for this month, as well as the other monthly goals that I had for myself this month, my January reading stats, and I talk a little bit about my rereads and nonfiction reads of this month. So I broke up my January wrap-up into two parts. This part, I mentioned all of the stuff I'm going to talk about. There's tons of content for it. And the second half of the January wrap-up will be coming out tomorrow, where I talk about all the fiction books that I actually choose to read during the month of January. So we are going to start with my January reading stats. In the month of January, I ended up reading 22 books, which is crazy, but most of them were audiobooks. So I ended up reading 4 contemporary books, 8 fantasy books, 1 sci-fi book. I read 1 historical fiction book, 1 romance book, and 2 mystery/thriller types of books. I also read 1 classic, 2 memoirs, 1 financial kind of book, and 1 miscellaneous nonfiction book. So I had pretty good variety. There was still a ton of fantasy in there, but it's my main genre that I love reading, so that's to be expected. As for ratings, I had 9 5-star books, which again, really high ratings. I think I'm just understanding more what kind of books I like, so I end up picking up more books that I like rather than picking up ones that I don't like as much. So yeah, 9 5-star books. I had 6 4.5-star books, 4 4-star books, 1 3.5-star, 1 3-star, and 1 2.5-star book this month. As for age range, I read mostly adult books this month. I read 14 adult books, 1 new adult book, 3 YA, 2 middle grade, and 2 miscellaneous that don't really have a target audience. So I definitely read a lot of adult books this month, which is kind of my go-to anyway. And for page count, most of the books that I read were between the pages of 300 to 400 pages, which I think is expected. I will put a little chart up on the screen because I won't go through every single range there, so you can see kind of where my page counts fell. Additionally, I read 8 physical books, 1 ebook, and 13 audiobooks, which for me with audiobooks, I'm very much a mood reader. There are some months that I'll read like 20 audiobooks and then other months where I'll read none. I have a lot of time where I could read audiobooks during the day. That's why the total number of books is so high, is because I read a lot of audiobooks this month. That's not going to be the case every month this year. Just the last couple of months, I've been really into audiobooks. So that's why I've been reading so much. If you look at physical books, I only ended up reading 8 physical books, which I think is a good number for 1 month anyway. So this month I finished 2 rereads. Both of them were on audio. I finished The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss and The Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Both of those novels are first books in fantasy series that are some of my favorites, so I gave them both 5 stars. I won't talk about them too much because they're rereads, but if you haven't read those yet, where have you been? You should definitely read those because they're really good. And now for the rest of my monthly goals. I made a goal of reading at least 8 physical books in the month. I read exactly 8 physical books, so met that goal, which I'm happy about, though I feel like I could have done better than 8, but I'm not gonna complain. I read 8 physical books, and a lot of them were some longer ones, so I feel like I did a good job with that one. Also, I wanted to read 1 classic, 1 mystery/thriller novel, 1 historical fiction, 1 sci-fi novel, and 1 book over 800 pages, which I expected would be a high fantasy novel. So I am so happy to say I met all of those goals. For my classic novel, I read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. For my mystery thriller novel, I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. For my historical fiction novel, I read The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. For my sci-fi this month, I read Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. And for my 800-page novel, I read Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which is only like 806 pages, but it's over the 800 mark, so it definitely counts. So I will talk about all of those books later in more detail, but now we're gonna get to my unwrapped books for this month. So one of my challenges this year is to read one of my wrapped books every week of the year, at least get through 50% of the book. And I have to say, I'm happy that I at least tried to read one book a week for this month, which I wasn't even sure if I would even try to do it, but I definitely tried to do it, so I'm happy that I did that. So these are all my unwrapped books for the month of January, so let's talk about them now. So the first unwrapped book that I had in the month of January is Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. So this is the first book in the Belgariad series. This is a high fantasy series that was written, I think, in the 1980s. I really like how this book started. It has a really good startup and premise. In the past, there were these gods that ruled the earth, but one of them was very evil. So there was this god war, and it created a lot of death and destruction, and all of the other gods decided to step away from the world for the sake of peace. They left an orb with a royal family, and as long as the orb is in the world and hasn't been destroyed, then the evil god cannot take over and rule the world. And the royal family has a silver mark that basically says that they're the keeper of the orb. The book starts many years later, after the royal family is not really around anymore, and we're following an orphan boy named Garion who lives as his aunt and has a silver mark on his palm. So you can kind of guess where I'm going with this book. It started off really strong in that sense. It has a really great premise, but nothing happens in this book. Like, nothing happens in this book. So this is 256 pages, and I felt like I was reading like the first 80 pages of a much larger book. Like, I didn't think that this needed to be that long, and I felt like there needed to be more plot for the page count of this book. I just felt like nothing really happened, and there were a lot of side parts that I feel like were supposed to be characterization, but they didn't feel like characterization. I liked the idea of this book. I didn't so much like the execution of it. There are like 6 novels in this series, and I don't see myself buying them. I could borrow them from the library though and continue on because I am intrigued to see where this book is going. But I've tried the audiobooks for the series, which my library has the entire audiobook collection on the Libby app, but I really don't like the audiobooks for this. So if they get the ebooks, I might continue on with the series. But right now, I don't see myself buying this series to read it. I ended up rating this 3.5 stars, which is lower than I wanted to, but it's still a really strong beginning to a series. I just don't think it qualifies as a whole book, if that makes sense. The next book that I unwrapped this month is The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith, and I loved this book. I really, really loved it. If you haven't checked out my reading vlog for this one, definitely check it out because I talked about it so much in the reading vlog. This is following a girl named Eddings, and it starts with the aftermath of when she was raped by her brother's best friend, whom at the time she had a crush on. And I think she's like 12 or 13 when this happens, so it's definitely traumatic. Definitely very traumatic, and it follows her throughout high school and how she kind of wraps her mind about what has happened to her and how she deals with that situation and the emotional strain that it has on her. Definitely tons of trigger warnings in this one, so definitely check out the trigger warnings before you pick this one up because it gets dark. There are definitely parts of it that gets dark. I thought the beginning first scene would be the darkest scene, and it definitely gets a lot worse than that in this book. But I loved following the character of Eden because she's not really a likable character at all. She has a lot of flaws, and she is so rude to people around her, and she treats people like, she doesn't really treat people very nicely, but she's also somehow still a character that you can root for and wants to watch her story as she grows and learns and realizes what she's been doing all of this time. So I really enjoyed this book. There were definitely parts of it that were really, really hard to read, but definitely one worth picking up. I ended up giving it 5 stars. The next unwrapped book I have this month is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I was really not excited when I picked this book up, but it turned out better than I thought it would because I definitely thought I was going to end up DNFing this book because I didn't think I was ready to read a book like this because it is such a big classic, and classics are hard enough to read as it is because they don't have modern writing style. But I found the writing actually not to be that hard to read, but the story was a little bit boring. That being said, I really like the thematic elements that it's had to this story. It had great commentary on class and social structure and our expectations and how the world and people don't always meet our expectations of them. But I found the actual story to be incredibly boring. We're following a character named Pip, who is a orphan who lives with his sister and becomes a blacksmith's apprentice. But when he grows older, he has a mysterious benefactor that wants to raise him up to be a gentleman with great expectations, hence the title. I felt like it was way overwritten. It's almost 500 pages, and I feel like you could do this same book in less than 300 pages and it would be amazing, but there was just so many words and parts of this were just incredibly boring because of that. But I really liked its commentary, so I ended up giving it 3 stars because I think it is a solid read. I definitely understand why it's a classic and why people still love this book, but it's just not really my cup of tea. The next book that I unwrapped this month is Bloodlines by Richelle Mead. I picked this book up right after I had finished the Vampire Academy series. That was back when I was reading like Twilight and The Mortal Instruments and books like that, and I really liked the Vampire Academy series at the time, so I picked this book up because I wanted to read more by Richelle Mead, and I started reading this back then, and I DNF'd it, but I've kept the book all of these years. When I looked at the book when I unwrapped it in January, I just had no desire to read it, so I decided not to even try and to unhaul it immediately. So for that week, I decided to unwrap a second book that week, and I ended up picking Borne by Vandermeer. I was a lot more excited to get into this book because I really wanted to get into more sci-fi. I feel like this book for me was like jumping into the deep end before I learned how to swim, because it's new weird sci-fi, which I haven't read a whole lot of regular sci-fi to begin with, and this one just was a little much for me. I also didn't really enjoy the characters. I didn't enjoy the world. I really did not like the writing style in this one. So for me, it just wasn't working, and I ended up DNFing this one as well, and it's gonna be an unhaul, unfortunately. The last unwrapped book that I had for this month is The Black Company by Glen. So this is a grimdark fantasy following the Black Company, which is a mercenary group. So it's kind of like a military fantasy. It's definitely well within my comfort zone. That being said, I'm a lot more interested in the other fantasy books that I'm reading right now, so I'm not enjoying it as much as I want to. I'm about 100 pages in. I still have a few more days to get to the 50% mark in order to keep this book, and I think I will get to the 50% mark, but I don't think I'm gonna end up finishing it now. I definitely think it's one that I'm gonna have to pick up later to finish the book, just because I'm more into the other books that I'm reading right now. But I'm allowed to keep one book a month that I don't finish but get to the 50% mark. So this will be that book this month. I still have, like I said, another 50 pages, but I have 3 more days or something for the week. So that's my story with this one. I don't have a rating for it, obviously, because I haven't finished it yet. Some highs in my unwrap-up, a lot of lows, but I think that's to be expected. These are all books that I was excited for at one point, but am not as excited for now, so I think that's definitely to be expected with these books. I also feel like it's good for me to get rid of books that maybe I'm not as excited for, so that I can get books that I'm more excited for and enjoy reading more because of that. Last but not least, I wanted to quickly mention the nonfiction books that I read this month. I'm not going to go too in-depth with these because this is getting to be a very long video, and I feel like most people don't care that much about nonfiction anyway, but I love reading nonfiction on audiobook, so I highly recommend checking these out on audiobook. The first nonfiction that I read this month is Educated by Tara Westover. Educated is a memoir following Tara Westover because she was not educated as a child and is now a PhD, and kind of her life and how education has shaped that life. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I definitely really enjoyed this book, and I think she had just an important story to tell. The next nonfiction book that I read is Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg. So last year I read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and really enjoyed it. So I decided to pick up Smarter, Faster, Better. This is one of the things I love about this book, is that it's so well researched and goes so in depth into the ideas that he has about goal setting and stuff like that. And It was just such an interesting book to read. It's definitely one that I'm gonna have to reread, really get the content down, but I highly recommend it. I ended up giving it 5 stars. The next nonfiction book that I ended up picking up is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. So this is a nonfiction classic, basically, because it was written quite a while ago. It definitely is a product of its time, so it can be offensive to people if you're not used to the kind of language that it uses and stuff like that, but it definitely has a lot of great ideas, but it's also a very weird book. I enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And the last nonfiction book that I picked up this month is Orange is the New Black by Piper Kerman. So this book is really well known for the Netflix series, and I definitely think it is a very interesting memoir about the prison system and was definitely worth the read. I definitely liked being able to compare it to the show because the characters are definitely not as outrageous in the book as they are in the show, but it was very interesting and I really liked reading it. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you want to know more about the books that I read, definitely check out my reading vlogs because I go way more in depth on each book as I'm reading it during my reading vlogs. I will link all the January reading vlogs down below for you guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I post videos every Monday, Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday, so consider subscribing. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. I'm now on Instagram as well as Goodreads, so links to those are down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!